Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and today I'm going to answer the question, can shorter, more frequent podcasts bring you better results? One of the big things I preach when it comes to podcasting is not getting hung up on episode length. Whether your show is 10, 20, 30, 60 minutes, it really comes down to the quality of the content within. If you can get your point across in a certain time, there's no point in clogging your podcast with filler just to hit a certain time mark. Personally, I believe the sweet spot for most podcasts is between 30 and 60 minutes. Now, that's not to say that a longer form podcast doesn't work, but my thought with the 30 to 60 range is your audience has a life outside of your podcast. So that block of time is pretty reasonable for them to consume your show in one sitting. And they probably have other podcasts in their queue to enjoy too. So you don't want them to dip out early on your show. Again, this is nothing against the long form podcasts of the world that are out there, but to me, as a listener, 30 to 60 minutes is just right. That said, is there something to be said for shorter episodes delivered in a more frequent manner? Now, maybe I'm answering this question with a little bit of bias since this is what I do with Pod Theory, but yes, I feel there absolutely is. The reason I chose to do shorter episodes 5 days a week with Pod Theory was I wanted to take a small block of time from your day to cover a specific topic in detail. Now, could I expand more on each idea? I could, but the goal is to provide you with some actionable information more frequently and allow you to get back to your day. From your perspective, bringing you long-form content every day would be more difficult to consume. You most likely have other podcasts in your rotation, like I said before, and like all of us, you have a life outside of the podcast world. For me as a producer, it would be much more time-consuming to create long-form content every day when I have other responsibilities on my plate. Your podcast's format and approximate length of time for each episode is something you should have landed on in your initial planning stages. But that doesn't mean you can't pivot once you get the ball rolling. You may discover that your shorter episodes get more downloads and more attention from your audience. If you see this trend developing, change things up. The important thing is to commit to your approach. Don't do a blend of content length where your episode is 5 minutes one week and then an hour and a half the next week and then 10 minutes the next. Your content is conditioning your audience for a certain experience every time they download an episode. And if that experience is all over the map, it's going to be harder for them to truly commit to your show. They may enjoy the short form episodes but hate the long form ones, or vice versa. This inconsistency in episode format could lead listeners to only consume a portion of your content. But if you keep each episode consistent with format and time, your audience developing the habit of listening to every show you produce will increase. If you've been listening to Pod Theory since the beginning, you've most likely noticed my approach. Every weekday, Monday through Friday, I bring you an episode that's typically under 10 minutes. Now, a couple times I've gone over that mark by a minute or two, but my goal is to keep each lesson tight and succinct. Every 30th episode, I do something more long form and welcome others onto the show. The overall theme remains the same when I have guests on. The content is informative, it's useful, and it's actionable information. But those episodes flip to an interview format and give you perspectives from others. On episode 30, I interviewed SEO expert Megan Pritz about the importance of SEO for podcasts. On episode 60, I did a roundtable with 4 other podcasters covering the impact COVID-19 has had on podcasting. For episode 90, I'll be bringing on a mental health professional to discuss burnout and how we as podcasters can avoid getting burnt out from our efforts. From a production standpoint, I can tell you that I'm happy with my decision to go with short-form content and space it out daily for you to consume. But don't think that it's less time-consuming. Yes, putting together each individual episode takes less time, but when you factor in that I'm recording and editing multiple episodes, plus coming up with scripts, bullet points, and show notes for multiple episodes, the time spent producing a week's worth of content is equivalent to the time spent on one long-form episode. So what it really comes down to is how you want to present your content and how you feel your audience will react to it. If you feel your audience will benefit from shorter, more frequent content from you, then make that change. Or if you're launching a show, start with that format. But make sure whatever direction you go with your content, that you carry it out with consistency, quality, and with the listener in mind. And that's going to wrap up episode 80 of Pod Theory. Before we go, I'd like to read a review I received on Apple Podcasts for the show. This one comes to us from Meg Pre, and she says, when you're making a podcast, you need to find good resources that will help you do it right. Pod Theory is definitely a resource you'll want to have. Each episode shares new information about different important points of podcasting. There are also notes released on the website regularly if you need some quick takeaways, which is super helpful. Highly recommend it. Meg, thank you for those kind words. And yes, I'm happy to report that jasoncercone.com is back up and fully functioning once again. In case you missed it, my site crashed right before Christmas and I've been working diligently to get it back to form. It's at a point where I can comfortably say, we're back, baby. You can check things out over at jasoncercone.com, connect with me, book a consultation, check out all of the content. It's your world, boss. Good talk. I'll see you back here next time. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.